The rain was relentless that night, hammering the roof of our old house like it wanted to break through. I stood in the doorway, my backpack slung over one shoulder. The weight of it nothing compared to the ache in my chest. At 18, I thought I knew the world, but I didn't know how to feel when my own father looked at me like I was a stranger. His voice still echoed in my ears. Sharp and final, "You're no son of mine. Get out." I'd always been the odd one out in our family. My father, Richard Hayes, was a titan in our small town, the kind of man who built an empire from nothing. Hayes Construction was his pride, a company that put roofs over half the county's heads. He was all sharp suits and sharper words, a man who valued discipline over dreams. My mother, softer but worn down by his iron will, never spoke against him. My older sister, Clara, was his mirror, ambitious, polished, destined to inherit his throne. And then there was me, Ethan, the kid who'd rather sketch buildings than balance ledgers, who'd sneak out to stargaze instead of studying business plans. To him, I was a disappointment, a flaw in his perfect blueprint. That night, it wasn't one fight that broke us. It was years of them small rebellions, like refusing to join the company straight out of high school, or bigger ones, like the time I told him I wanted to study architecture instead of business. He saw my dreams as defiance, my sketches as scribbles. The final straw came when he found my college application, hidden under my mattress like a guilty secret. He didn't yell. He just pointed to the door and said those words that cut deeper than any blade. I stepped into the rain, the cold biting through my thin jacket. The street stretched out, dark and endless, and I had nowhere to go. No money, no plan, just a stubborn spark in my gut that refused to let me beg. I walked until my shoes were soaked, until the town's lights faded behind me. I didn't know it then, but that night was the start of everything, every triumph, every scar, every lesson that would bring me back to this house 12 years later. The first months were brutal. I hitchhiked to the city, sleeping in shelters when I could, working odd jobs when I couldn't. I washed dishes, hauled boxes, swept floors, anything to keep from starving. But every night, I'd pull out my sketchbook, the one thing I'd kept from home. I'd draw buildings, wild ones, with curves and glass that caught the stars. Those sketches were my rebellion, my way of proving I wasn't nothing. I enrolled in community college, scraping by on scholarships and sheer grit. Architecture became my lifeline, a way to build something permanent in a world that felt like it was crumbling. By 22, I'd clawed my way into a decent firm, a small outfit that took a chance on a kid with no connections, but a lot of hunger. I worked harder than anyone, staying late, tweaking designs until they sang. My first big break came when I pitched a community center for a low-income neighborhood. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise of hope, with open spaces and warm light. The client loved it. That project got my name out there. And soon, I was the one they called for jobs that needed heart as much as steel. Years passed, and I built a life. Not the kind my father would have respected, no corner office. No empire, but one that felt true. I had a small apartment, a few close friends, and a reputation as someone who could turn ideas into reality. I didn't think about home much, or at least I tried not to. Clara would call sometimes, her voice tight with loyalty to Dad, but laced with worry for me. She'd tell me he was fine, that the company was thriving. I'd nod, say I was fine too, and change the subject. But the truth was, I carried that night with me, the rain and the doors slamming shut. It was a wound that never quite healed. Then, 12 years after I left, the phone rang. It was Clara, her voice different this time, shaky, almost desperate. "Ethan, it's Dad. The company's in trouble. He needs you." I laughed, bitter and hollow. The man who'd thrown me out, who'd called me worthless, needed me. I wanted to hang up, to let him drown in his own pride. But something stopped Mehmed's curiosity. Maybe something deeper. I agreed to meet him, not because I owed him anything, but because I needed to see it for myself. I drove back to that small town. The roads familiar but foreign, like a song I hadn't heard in years. The house looked smaller, the paint peeling, the lawn overgrown. My father was waiting on the porch, older now, his hair gray, his shoulders stooped. He didn't look like a titan anymore. He looked like a man who'd lost something he couldn't name. "Ethan," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I need your help." The porch creaked under my weight as I stood there, staring at the man who'd once been larger than life. Richard Hayes, the unyielding force who'd shaped my childhood with his rules and his rage, now looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. His eyes, once sharp enough to cut through any excuse, were clouded with something I didn't recognize: fear, maybe, or shame. The air between us was thick with 12 years of silence, and I wasn't sure I wanted to break it. "Help," I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. "You didn't want me around when I was a kid. Why now?" He flinched, just enough for me to notice, and gestured to the door. "Come inside. Please." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like he'd had to dig it up from some forgotten place. Against my better judgment, I followed him. The house hadn't changed much: same faded wallpaper, same heavy oak table in the dining room. But it felt emptier, like the life had been sucked out of it. Clara was there, sitting at the table with a stack of papers that looked like they'd been shuffled 100 times. She stood when she saw me, her smile tight but genuine. "Ethan," she said, hugging me quickly. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, still wary, and sat across from my father. He slid a folder toward me, his hands trembling slightly. "Hayes Construction," he said. It's falling apart." I opened the folder, scanning the numbers, red ink everywhere. Debts piling up like snow in a blizzard. The company that had once been the backbone of this town was hemorrhaging money. Bad contracts, outdated equipment, a workforce that had dwindled to a skeleton crew. I looked up at him, waiting for an explanation. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice low. "After you left, I pushed too hard. Took on projects we couldn't handle. Trusted the wrong people. Clara tried to warn me, but I didn't listen." And now, he trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. "We're 6 months from bankruptcy." I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let him face the consequences of his pride. But another part, the part that still remembered the man who'd taught me to swing a hammer, who'd once carried me on his shoulder, scowled. "Not yet." "Why me?" I asked. "You've got Clara. She's been running things with you." Clara's eyes flicked to our father, then back to me. "I'm good with numbers, Ethan, but I'm not you. You see things differently. You always have. We need someone who can rebuild, not just manage the collapse." I wanted to laugh. Rebuild. For the man who'd thrown me out. But as I looked at the papers, at the legacy my father had built and was now losing, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about him. It was about the people who worked for him, the town that depended on Hayes Construction. It was about proving something to him, to myself. "I'll look at it," I said finally. "But I'm not promising anything." The next few days were a blur. I pored over the company's books, walked the empty warehouse, talked to the few employees who were still hanging on. The problems were deeper than I'd thought. My father had chased big, flashy projects to keep up with competitors, But he'd cut corners, ignored maintenance, and driven away talent. The company was a house of cards, and the wind was already blowing. I started small, meeting with the remaining crew tough, weathered men and women who'd known me as a kid. They were skeptical at first, but I listened, asked questions, and sketched ideas on napkins. We needed a new direction, something that could save the company without betraying its roots. I proposed a pivot, smaller, sustainable projects, affordable housing, community spaces, designs that prioritized people over profit. It was the kind of work I'd built my career on, the kind my father had once scoffed at. To my surprise, he didn't fight me. He sat in on meetings, quiet, watching as I laid out plans. Sometimes I'd catch him staring, like he was seeing me for the first time. But we didn't talk about the past. Not yet. There was too much work to do. Clara and I stayed up late, crunching numbers, drafting proposals. She was sharp, methodical, but she trusted my instincts. And together we started to see a path forward. We secured a small contract for a community center, a project I knew inside and out. It wasn't enough to save the company, but it was a start, a spark in the dark. Every night, I drive back to my hotel, exhausted but restless. I'd think about that rainy night 12 years ago, about the kid who'd walked away with nothing but a sketchbook and a stubborn heart. I wasn't that kid anymore, but I wasn't sure who I was to my father now, either. All I knew was that I was here, trying to save something I'd spent years trying to forget. The community center project became our lifeline. It wasn't just about the money, though we needed every penny. It was about proving Hayes Construction could still deliver. I threw myself into the work, sketching designs that blended function with beauty, meeting with clients to ensure every detail was right. The crew, skeptical at first, started to come around. They saw I wasn't just Richard's kid. I was someone who knew how to build. My father stayed on the sidelines, watching but not interfering. It was strange, seeing him so quiet. The man who'd once barked orders now listened, nodding as I explained my vision. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of pride in his eyes, but it was fleeting, overshadowed by the weight of his mistakes. I wanted to ask him why he'd changed, why he'd called me back, but the words stayed locked in my throat. We were too busy keeping the company alive. Clara was my anchor. She handled the logistics, budgets, schedules, permits, while I focused on the creative side. We made a good team, better than I'd expected. One night, as we sat in the office surrounded by blueprints, she looked at me and said, "You didn't have to come back. You know, after everything." I shrugged, tracing a line on a sketch. Maybe I did. For me, not for him. She nodded, like she understood. He's different now? Losing the company, it's humbled him. I didn't respond. Humble or not, he was still the man who'd turned me away. Forgiveness wasn't something I could just hand over. Not yet. The community center took shape faster than I'd hoped. The crew worked overtime, pouring concrete, framing walls, installing windows that let in streams of light. I was there every day, sleeves rolled up, working alongside them. It felt good, like I was building something real again. The town started to notice, too. People would stop by, curious, asking if Hayes Construction was back. I'd smile, say we were trying, and keep working. But the clock was ticking. The community center was a bandage, not a cure. The company's debts were still a mountain, and creditors were circling. I knew we needed a bigger win, something to put us back on the map. That's when Clara found it, a bid for a library renovation in the next county. It was a high-profile project, the kind that could draw investors and rebuild our reputation. But it was also a risk. If we failed, it would be the end. I spent nights refining the proposal, blending modern design with the library's historic charm. My father sat in on the pitch meeting, silent but present. When I presented the sketches, the client's eyes lit up. They loved the idea of preserving the past while building for the future. It was exactly what I'd always believed in, what my father had never understood. Until now. Maybe. We won the bid. The crew celebrated, clapping me on the back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The library project was bigger than anything we'd tackled in years. And we were still understaffed, underfunded, and running on fumes. I needed my father to step up, not as the boss, but as a partner. One evening, I found him in the warehouse, staring at an old blueprint of the first building Hayes Construction ever built. I stood beside him, the silence heavy. "Why'd you call me?" I asked finally. "After all this time." He didn't look at me. "Because you're better than I ever was," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't see it then. I do now. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe him, to let go of the anger I'd carried for years. But another part couldn't forget the rain, the door, the words that had cut me loose. I nodded, turned away, and went back to work. There was too much at stake to get lost in the past. The library project pushed us to our limits. We hired new workers, trained them on the fly, and stretched our budget to the breaking point. I was everywhere in sight, in meetings, sketching late into the night. Clara kept us organized, but even she was fraying at the edges. My father started showing up more, not just watching, but helping carrying materials, talking to the crew, even cracking a rare joke. It was like seeing a ghost come back to life. But ghosts don't erase the past. Every time I saw him, I remembered that night, the way he'd looked at me like I was nothing. I wanted to save the company, but I wasn't sure I could save us. The library renovation was a beast, demanding every ounce of energy we had. The building was a century old, its bones strong, but its skin crumbling. We were racing against time, weather, and a budget that seemed to shrink by the day. But there was something alive in the work, something that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with architecture. Every beam we reinforced, every window we restored, felt like a step toward redemption, not just for the company, but for me. My father was there more often now, not just observing but pitching in. He'd lost the polish of his younger years, but his hands still knew the tools. His eyes still caught details others missed. One afternoon, I saw him showing a new hire how to square a frame, his voice patient in a way I didn't recognize. It was disorienting, like watching a stranger wear my father's face. I wanted to ask him who he was now, but the words never came. Clara noticed it too. "He's trying, Ethan," she said one night as we sorted invoices in the office. "He knows he messed up. Trying doesn't undo 12 years. I said, sharper than I meant. She didn't push back, just gave me that look of hers, half understanding, half pleading. I hated how it made me feel, like I was the one being unreasonable. The library started to take shape. The crew was a mix of old hands and new faces, all of them working like their lives depended on it. I'd walk the site at dawn, sketching adjustments, imagining the kids who'd read here, the families who'd gather. It wasn't just a job. It was a legacy, one I wanted to leave behind. My father saw it too, I think. He'd linger over my sketches, tracing lines with a calloused finger, saying nothing but staying longer than he needed to. Then came the setback. A supplier backed out, leaving us short on materials. The budget couldn't take another hit, and the timeline was already razor thin. I spent hours on the phone, begging, bartering, trying to find a solution. My father found me in the office, head in my hands, the weight of it all pressing down. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady. We always do. I looked up, irritation flaring. We. You haven't been we in a long time. He didn't flinch this time. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. The words hit like a punch. I'd waited years to hear them, but now they felt too small. Too late. I stood, brushing past him, and went back to the site. There was no time for apologies. Not when everything was on the line. We scraped by, finding a new supplier at the last minute. But the close call left us shaken. The crew was exhausted. The creditors were impatient. And I was starting to wonder if we could pull this off. Clara kept us grounded. But even she couldn't hide the strain. One night, she pulled me aside. You're carrying too much. Ethan. Let him help. He had his chance. I said. He blew it. Maybe, she said. But you're here now. And so is he. I didn't want to hear it. But her words stuck. The next day, I asked my father to take on more responsibility overseeing deliveries, coordinating with subcontractors. He didn't hesitate, diving in with a focus I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. The library's grand opening was set for a month out, and the town was buzzing. We were on track, but barely. Every day brought a new challenge: leaky pipes, faulty wiring, a storm that delayed us a week. I was running on coffee and adrenaline, my sketches blurring together. My father was there through it all, quieter than I remembered, but steady. One night, as we worked late, he handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You're good at this, Ethan. Better than I ever was." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to throw the coffee in his face, to scream about the years he'd stolen. But another part saw the man in front of Minute the Titan. Not the tyrant, but a father trying to make amends. I took the coffee, nodded, and went back to work. It wasn't peace, but it was something. The library was nearly done, its walls gleaming with fresh paint, its windows catching the morning light. The crew was proud. The town was hopeful. And for the first time, I felt like we might actually pull this off. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still coming, not with the company, but with the man who'd started it all. The library was almost finished, its skeleton now clothed in brick and glass, a monument to what we could do when we pulled together. The town was alive with anticipation, and the crew wore their exhaustion like a badge of honor. I walked the site every morning, checking every detail, sketching last-minute tweaks. This wasn't just a building anymore. It was proof that Hayes Construction could rise from its ashes. But it was also a mirror, reflecting everything I'd fought for and everything I'd lost. My father was a constant presence now, not just helping but leading in his own quiet way. He'd talk to the crew, share stories of the company's early days, his voice carrying a warmth I didn't remember. The workers respected him, not as the boss he'd been, but as someone who'd seen the bottom and was climbing back up. I watched him, torn between resentment and something softer, something I wasn't ready to name. Clara noticed it too. "He's proud of you," she said one evening as we reviewed the final plans. "He won't say it, but he is." He had 12 years to say it. I replied, my voice tight. "I'm not here for his pride." She sighed, setting down her pen. "Then why are you here, Ethan? You could have walked away." I didn't have an answer, not one I could put into words. Maybe it was the town, the people who'd known me as a kid. Maybe it was the company, the legacy I'd once been part of. Or maybe it was him, the man I'd spent years hating but couldn't quite let go of. I changed the subject, and we went back to work. The final push was brutal. We were days from the opening, And everything that could go wrong did. A shipment of tiles arrived cracked. The electrical system threw a fit. And the weather turned against us. Rain soaking the site. I was everywhere. Troubleshooting. Calming the crew. Keeping the client happy. My father stepped up too, handling crises with a calm I didn't expect. When a pipe burst, flooding the basement, he was there with the crew, knee-deep in water, working until midnight to fix it. That night, as we sat in the office, soaked and exhausted, he looked at me and said, "I was wrong about you, Ethan. I thought you didn't have it in you. I was wrong." I stared at him, the words sinking in. They were what I'd wanted to hear for years, but they didn't feel like victory. They felt heavy, like a debt I wasn't sure I could repay. "Why now?" I asked. "Why say this now?" "Because I'm running out of time," he said, his voice breaking. "And I don't want to lose you again." I didn't know what to say. The anger was still there, a dull ache, but it was softer now, mixed with something else, grief. Maybe. Or hope. I nodded, stood, and left the room. There was too much to do, too much to feel. The opening day arrived, clear and crisp, the kind of day that made you believe in new beginnings. The library was stunning, its old bones polished, its new spaces warm and inviting. The town turned out in droves, kids running through the stacks, families taking photos, the mayor shaking my hand like I was a hero. I stood in the crowd, watching, feeling the weight of what we'd done. My father was there, in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore, shaking hands, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. When the speeches were over, he found me by the entrance, the sunlight streaming through the glass. "You did this," he said. "Not me. You." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man he was now, not the one who'd thrown me out, but the one who'd stayed, who'd worked, who'd tried. "We did it," I said finally. It wasn't forgiveness. Not fully, but it was a step. The library was a success, and the contracts started coming in small at first, then bigger. Hayes Construction was breathing again, not strong but alive. I stayed on, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The town needed us, and maybe I needed this too, a chance to build something new, not just with bricks, but with the people I'd left behind. The months after the library opening were a whirlwind. Hayes Construction was back on its feet, not soaring but steady, like a ship finding its course after a storm. New projects came in, modest ones, like renovating a school or building affordable homes. But they were ours, and they mattered. The crew grew, new faces mixing with the old, and the warehouse hummed with life again. I was still sketching, still dreaming in lines and light. But now it felt like I was building something bigger than myself. My father was different too. He wasn't the boss anymore, not in the way he'd been. He deferred to me and Clara, letting us lead while he took on smaller roles, mentoring new hires, checking plans, sharing the kind of wisdom that only comes from failure. I watched him, still wary but less angry, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one who'd shaped my past. Clara and I found a rhythm, a partnership that felt like it had always been there, waiting. She'd tease me about my late-night sketching, and I'd rib her about her obsession with spreadsheets. But we were a team. One night, as we closed up the office, she said, "You're staying, aren't you?" I hesitated. I'd planned to leave after the library, to go back to my life in the city. But something had shifted. This town, this company, this family, they were part of me, whether I liked it or not. "For now," I said, and she smiled like she knew it was more. The real change came slowly, in moments I didn't expect. My father started inviting me to dinner, Just the two of us. At first, I refused. The old wound's too raw. But one evening, I said yes. We sat at the old oak table, eating takeout because neither of us could cook like Mom used to. He talked about the early days of the company, about the mistakes he'd made, the pride that had blinded him. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but he was trying to explain, to bridge the gap between us. I was scared, he said one night, his voice low. Scared you'd outshine me. Scared I'd lose control. So I pushed you away. I looked at him, the man who'd once been my hero and my villain. You did more than push, I said. You broke something. He nodded, his eyes wet. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it. I didn't say anything, but I stayed. That was something. At least. The company grew stronger. And so did we. I took on bigger projects, ones that blended my vision with the company's roots. We built a park, a community hub, spaces that brought people together. The town started to see Hayes Construction not just as a business, but as a promise kept. My father was there for every ribbon cutting, every handshake, his pride quiet but real. One day, as we walked the site of a new housing project, he stopped and looked at me. I don't deserve you, Ethan, he said, but I'm glad you're here. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. The anger was still there, a shadow, but it was fading. In its place was something new, not love. Not yet, but understanding. We'd both been broken, in different ways, and we were both trying to build something better. Years later, I'd look back on that rainy night when I was 18, the night I thought I'd lost everything. I'd see it not as an ending, but a beginning the moment I started to build my own life, my own legacy. Hayes Construction was part of that now, but so was I. And so was my father, not as the man who'd kicked me out, but as the one who'd asked me to come back. We weren't fixed, not completely. Some wounds don't heal. They just scar over, strong enough to hold, but always there. But we were trying, and maybe that was enough. As I stood on that site, sketching a future in the dirt, I realized I wasn't just saving his company. I was saving us.